Wednesday, April 26th, 2023, and the time is 1:02. And I'm Sam Barami, the Senior Advisor on Natural Medicine Services and the Program Director. I'm the acting chair of this subcommittee till a subcommittee chair is decided. I'm declaring that we do have a quorum present for our meeting today. The purpose of this meeting is to act on important business related to the practice of natural medicine in the state of Colorado. The board will make its decisions on agenda items based upon written materials provided for its consideration in advance of this meeting. The public is welcome to listen. The public should not address the board unless requested by the board. As a friendly reminder to board members, please note that some of the material contained in the agenda packet may be deemed confidential. In addition, the board should not discuss the issuance of confidential letters of concern or seek legal guidance in open session. Such matters will be moved to executive session for discussion. We won't be holding an executive session for this meeting. So with that, thank you for attending today's meeting and for your interest in these important matters. I would now like to begin roll call. Dr. Brad Connor.
Present.
Dr. Lisa Hannum.
Present.
Lundy. Okay, absolutely. Mr. Skippy Mesro. Oh, his link must have dropped off. Dr. Stu Sicily.
Present.
Okay. Billy Wynn. All right. A few housekeeping items as we get started. I would like everyone to ask everyone to turn their cell phones and pagers to silent. I'd like to introduce the staff we have present today on the call. We have Karen McGovern, Amanda Weirs, Monica Sutherland, Sarah Werner, and with that, I'd like to invite the Assistant Attorney General to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. This is Brian Urankar with the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Awesome. And then I see we have Skippy back on. Awesome. So moving to
present.
Great. Agenda item number 1, nominating a subcommittee chair. I will continue to chair today's meeting, but moving forward, the subcommittee chair after today will chair all future meetings of this subcommittee. The chair will work with DPO staff and myself to schedule and set meetings, as well as work with staff on agenda items and materials for the board around the work in this subcommittee. With that, I would like to call for nominations for this for the chair of this subcommittee. Are there any nominations to be considered?
Any of you guys interested in the role for yourself and would want to be nominated?
Has anybody talked to Skippy? Would he be willing?
I don't know if I am the right person for that. I think that there's willing, yes, but I think there may be somebody more equipped. I was just looking to nominate somebody. I wasn't suggesting me.
Yeah. And so the chair of the subcommittee will work with DPO staff on the agenda and meet with me prior to the meeting and prepare the materials for the board around this work. And I see Billy Wynn just joined as well. And I called for nominations for the chair of the subcommittee and asked if anyone is interested.
I wonder if Billy would be.
I was going to say, I would say I'm myself.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Is anyone else interested in running? Okay. I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. With that, Dr. Connor is the chair of the Products Research and Data Subcommittee. So I'd like to move on to agenda item number 2, the review of the topic questions and to determine what, if any, questions should be added. We have provided questions that need to be expanded upon, reviewed, and answered. These are questions that the executive director of the agency needs to be answered for the agency. We have also provided in the board packet, Billy Wynn's subcommittee scope of work provided at the first meeting, adopted for each particular subcommittee. We would like for you to review and discuss these questions today, add additional questions, and work on answering them as best as you can. We will review the work at the following meeting and identify the questions of priority to be addressed. And we want to adopt these questions as the work moves forward. And I'm certain, as is the nature of the work, we will have more questions to answer and review. We want to leave today's meeting with questions for you to review and expand. So let's now open the floor for discussion. We'll start with the agency questions provided. We do have it on the screen here. I'm going to pull it up for myself as well. So briefly read over, and then we can go into folks' questions that they might have to add. So products research and data, what are the primary trusted research resources related to the efficacy of psilocybin, including product safety? What are the tools that facilitators will use to identify if psilocybin would be beneficial to a potential participant? What are the potential health risks and how should they be disclosed to a potential participant? What are the best practices for psilocybin production? What are the best practices for dose control? What are the appropriate additives that should be allowed, which should be prohibited? Which should be prohibited? Are there circumstances in which psilocybin should be denied to a participant? What should be the requirements and standard for an independent testing of psilocybin for concentration and contaminant? How do you dispose of psilocybin, including that which has failed testing or has been improperly stored? What education should be provided to facilitators as it relates to products, research, and data? And what, if any, information should be reported by licensed facilitators to the state to promote a balanced regulatory environment? So with that, I'd like to open up the floor.
Sam, can I ask a point of clarification question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is not on topic of questions, I apologize, but in the original materials that are sent out for the meeting, there's a note that we need one person to add or drop from the committee. When will we address that composition of the committee and whether someone needs to add or drop?
Yeah, we can do it after this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. Billy?
Thanks. So a question about the best practices for dose control. Is that, I guess I'm wondering if is it this committee's charge to look at the evidence around what dosage should actually be for these, facilitated sessions, and if that's the case, then we might want to add, either reword that or add something that explicitly, calls on us to look at the evidence and kind of compile the evidence and come up with some recommendations for what the, what basically like the therapy regimen should be.
Okay, we'll note that down.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I think, what does dose control mean? Like, I don't even know if I know what dose control means.
Yeah.
Does that mean
I
that,
read it as like how much is in like the pill or whatever, whatever medium will be used to deliver. That's how I kind of read that, as like as a matter of kind of manufacturing kind of question more than a like therapeutic,
right,
best practice.
Which would beg the question, are we gonna, is this, so you think about dose control, we may recommend a safe dose or a good starting dose, right? 25 milligrams of psilocybin and not, or 2 to 3 grams of plant material. But I think we also need some sort of question about, I don't want to say method of administration, but like how, dose across product types or something like that. I don't know, but because it's not going to be consistent necessarily. I think dose control is quite broad, and I think ways that we can make it more specific, including Billy, the question you just posed, and also something about whether this entity will make recommendations about method of administration. And if so, how does dose vary by method of administration?
What are the methods of administration, and how does method of administration vary?
How does it, well, I would say, how do the methods of administration, different methods of administration impact dose control or dosing recommendations?
Okay. Dr. Hannum.
So this may be addressed in the last question, but is there going to be a mechanism for tracking adverse events, and where are those reported to, and what are we doing with that information as a state?
I think I sent something similar to you, Sam, ahead of time, just some questions about like what type of, like a potential patient registry that would collect all the data, both, good and bad, safety, outcomes, efficacy, all that. And what would, how are we going to evaluate the program effectiveness? What type of program evaluations are we going to ask folks to conduct, and things that could lead to quality improvement? And how do we protect data from subpoena? Make sure that, people feel confident that the material is treated almost at the level of HIPAA, like same as protection.
De-identified data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remove all the PHI. Yeah.
I think building off that, then whether we would develop or have recommendations for how researchers or potential interested parties would gain access to, or whether they'd be permitted to gain access to a patient registry that contain that information. I mean, the reality is a lot of the questions are on this list. The data doesn't exist yet, but it will once this goes into play. And so it's going to be a rich data source, and we should have ways for people to have access to it so they can answer these research questions.
Billy?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the question may be, how do we build, I mean, I don't want to presuppose maybe some substantive answers in the question, but like, how do we build a statewide registry to capture outcomes data and adverse events? And I don't know. I mean, I think we have to make it explicit somewhere along the way that that's what we think the state should do. I certainly believe that, and I'm hearing others express that as well. I think that's probably one of the more important things this committee can accomplish, is to make sure that happens. Now, getting into how do we fund that, and I think that's where things make it more complicated, and obviously protecting confidentiality as well. But just want to endorse that direction and make sure we have questions that give us the avenue to build out recommendations around a very robust data registry.
Skippy?
Yes, sorry guys. I lost the last like 10 seconds there, so I apologize if any of this is redundant. But I just loved what I was hearing.
Oh, we lost him. Dr. Hannum.
Across the board, and I was just going, how can we study the efficacy of natural medicines across modalities over time at a population level? What markers of data should be collected by practitioners? Should that happen at intake, exit? Should it be follow-up? All of the above, either or? And should that data collection be required, optional, or recommended? Right. And then the other part that I heard come up that I thought was so great is like, how do we format, store, and share that information in a safe, compliant, anonymized way? And so that interested parties who can do good with that data, scientists or otherwise, can leverage it. I think a question that follows that I've been interested in is there a way for us to preserve anonymity, health records, et cetera, while still providing access for people to meet across nodes with permission when desired, right? So if there's an anonymized node over here that's getting way better than, 2 standard deviation outcomes for, say, complex PTSD, could a scientist say, like, hey, I want to see what's going on there, somehow get permission access, and then find out with permission on both sides who that person is and say, hey, I'd love to come study your work, right? I think like some permission structure for connection could be a really nice additive. I just love where you guys are all going. I'm super honored, by the way, to be serving with you all. This is super cool.
Dr. Hannum.
Yeah, and I think this was already kind of hinted at maybe by Bradley, but just thinking about rules and regulations about scientists trying to access data, how that's going to look, what would be required. And then kind of off topic from that, maybe a question around strain of psilocybin and how we're going to educate facilitators about that.
Yeah, the species. Dr. Sicily.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a few things. I want to see, how do we make the data collection very user-friendly and help that be part of their workflow so that it's not a huge imposition? And then if we remove all the PHI, there's no personal identifying information like no name, date of birth, email, or phone number, then I couldn't imagine why anybody wouldn't be allowed to access that if there's absolutely no PHI on the system. So I would encourage us to create that kind of environment where anybody can tap into that database if there's no PHI. And then I just want to see what data is actually going to be mandatory for all clients to share versus maybe there's higher resolution data that that they can opt in. They don't have to, they can opt in to share some demographic data about themselves, race data, gender, identity, whatever, I think there should be an opportunity to opt in for some higher resolution data, income level, maybe not mandatory, what language you speak at home, not mandatory, but they could opt in if they want. And then I just want to leave the final thing about who owns the data ultimately, and what will it be used for. Questions I want to make sure are in there. In my opinion, there shouldn't be any data ownership. I like to use the word data stewardship. It's about public health and how to manage these resources, but where does the data reside ultimately? Is this on paper initially and then transferred to the health agency? How do we do that securely with encrypted, security standard, cybersecurity implications, but still make it visible? I think that's my biggest question, is how does this become visible to the public, to regulators, researchers, and especially to government officials who may not like this program, who want it banned? I want them to make sure that they can see that data.
Skippy.
Thanks. So I also sit on the religious subcommittee, and I think I'm the only one here. So just sort of channel that voice, and we've had conversations about this work, and so I wonder how the data and study can include, integrate, and empower those religious, spiritual, and indigenous traditions, while also respecting their choice, sovereignty, and autonomy as desired. I think that's an important question for us to think about. And then this is sort of a subtext to a lot of the questions we're asking, but maybe it's good to state it overtly, which is just how can this data and this study and inform and improve the mental health of Coloradans, right? How can we really think about that as a chosen outcome? I think that's something I'd like to add.
Dr. Connor.
Yeah, I appreciate all this, and I do think we will have to ask some questions about where funding for all this is going to come from, and whether that funding includes just database management, or if we also want to try to recommend that the state identify funding sources to actually fund research projects within the system, which I think could be useful. We see some of that now in the cannabis world with original funding from CDPHE and now funding from ICR. I think that a similar mechanism would be really beneficial and would benefit not only the residents of Colorado, but the scientific field more broadly. And so I think questions about who's going to fund and whether we can identify sources of funding that would support research projects as well.
Such a great point.
Dr. Cicely, you have your hand raised.
Oh, I was just gonna echo what he said, that I know that SAMHSA, there's some other federal agencies that have been eager to fund patient registries in this area. So I know SAMHSA already provided a grant for the Oregon program to build out data collection. So I'm sure we can tap into some of that.
Skippy.
Sorry, guys, my last one, I swear. But thinking about the qualifications, licensing, and training, I think we need to think about how we build these structures of observational data, and as we're refining best practice as a result, how are we translating that on the ground to the center's practitioners and healers? So just thinking about that connected tissue of how we put that stuff into action in a reasonable way where we're getting the benefit of the improved knowledge, but also thinking about barriers and cost and fairness and all those things. So just how do we package and deliver that?
Billy.
Yeah, I wondering if we, and I know that Oregon's board produced compilation of evidence around psilocybin, and so I'm wondering if we should examine that and just ensure it's comprehensive. So we don't necessarily need to reproduce it if we feel comfortable in what it contains. But either way, this subcommittee I think should endorse some kind of review of the clinical literature around psilocybin. That's one thing, and then another thing is, and this is definitely a question for us to answer together, is is it our, and I think I kind of alluded to this before to make it more explicit, is it our charge to take that evidence and then come up with either recommended best practices or required best practices to say that this is the regimen for these patients with these certain diagnoses, and for one thing that would ensure the uniformity of data in terms of the outcomes that you get. Whereas if you have different facilitators and different people doing lots of different things, we're going to get much mushier data. Whereas if we have more specific guidelines around therapy, then we'll pretty soon be able to make some claims about whether or not that therapy works and its safety, et cetera.
Brian.
Yeah, sorry, my internet connection is being a little weird, so hopefully you can hear me. But just to echo what Billy's saying, I actually think you're statutorily required to do a lit review. So this is again in 105. It says the board shall, on an ongoing basis, review and evaluate existing research studies and real world data, and that's something that the board is supposed to be doing annually. So I would say that, to echo Billy's point, I think you're actually required by the statute to be doing a occasional lit review, kind of like what Oregon did.
So we may have a question then about what that looks like. Is this entity, or is DORA, releasing quarterly or annual reports where they review the literature in a similar fashion to what's being done in other states?
Brian, your hand's still up.
It's not on my screen, and my internet's really bad right now. So I'll just
Okay,
let you
okay.
know if I have another
Okay.
question.
Yeah, no worries. Dr. Sicily.
Yeah, I think couple things about the literature review. I know, yeah, we've got several work groups in other states that are already doing this. So I just want to make sure the staff is alert to the fact that not just Oregon, but I know Connecticut just did an in-depth literature just to save you the hassle of having to redo that. We should be able to get you access to that and make sure they haven't missed anything instead of starting from scratch. The other thing that's important, I think, for all of us to be aware is that the literature, the current scientific literature on psilocybin is all on synthetic molecule, and that's not what we're using in Colorado. So it's going to be very difficult to take an evidence based approach when there hasn't been a single controlled trial on the planet looking at natural mushrooms. So we got to keep that in mind. There really isn't any guidance. We are going to be the first people to really collect data on this. I mean, other than there's survey data, some, very weak observational trial, but there's never been a controlled trial. Everything is on synthetic molecule. And whole mushrooms perform differently than synthetic molecule. They're full of alkaloids and tryptamines.
Anything else on the data piece?
I don't know if this is a question, but for those of us who have worked, Dr. Sisley mentioned SAMHSA. So SAMHSA actually has a data reporting system that may be one that we could use as a model. They have it both for mental health and for substance use research, where they mandate an intake form that you have to use that collects information in a certain way. And there are some options I think that we give people, but then you upload all that information as part of the regulatory requirement when you have a SAMHSA grant into that database. So we may be able to learn from existing databases how to create such a system as well.
Anyone want to expand on that? Any other piece around data? And then I think one thing you guys should consider is cultivation and what that looks like, and then the species of psilocybin for this, and how I don't know if you guys want to expand on that specifically in your first considerations for the questions.
So Sam, can I ask you a point of clarification again?
Yeah.
Is this the subcommittee that's going to make recommendations primarily about cultivation, or is that coming from other subcommittees as well?
No, I think this would be in the subcommittee's wheelhouse. Yeah.
So that would also be distribution as well. So, or no?
Yeah.
Yes, and we should definitely add some questions about, regulations and or permitting around cultivation, regulations and or permitting around distribution, and recommendations for cultivation and distribution as well. Do you need more from me than that, or is that good enough to start?
No, I think that's good. I don't know if anyone else wants to expand on that.
I don't know, Sam, I sent you some stuff ahead of time in case my voice gives out, but I did send you a bunch of questions about what are we gonna do about, how are we gonna assure like what varieties of cubensis or other
Yeah.
psilocybin are we going to allow, and what grow techniques will be allowed, and what substrate, how do we measure, or evaluate the quality of the substrate being employed, the grow media, the cultivators, like giving incentives for cultivators to use, maybe locally grown grain and things like that. I think that'll be really valuable. But yeah, take a look at that.
Do you want to go over these, read some out if you can, or do you want me to read some of these
Yeah,
out?
you can read them. That'd be great.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Pull it up. So from the email, I have what are the best practices for psilocybin production? Allow for unrestricted cultivation of all biological genre containing psilocybin. They're more potent varieties than the common cubensis. The grow techniques are similar, yet the yield of pro-drug and active drugs within different genera can be significantly greater in some mushrooms. The cost to produce a consumable product from more potent varieties will enable the overall cost to produce to reduce. Example, same underlying cost to produce the equivalent dry weight of mushrooms, yet more potent mushrooms will yield more medicine, resulting in lower cost to produce the same amount of medicine when compared to cubensis. Grow media should be tested to ensure grow additives, boosters, are not added into such media. Enhancers change the plant's natural potency. The effects cultivators should have ability to produce their own grow media. There should be incentives for cultivators to use community-wide available ingredients for their grow media. Use locally grown grain. Use local manure from equine and bovine sources. This reduces the cost for the cultivator and eliminates the cost for manure removal for the animal owners. Cultivation for therapeutic use should only be permitted in non-private property locations. Allowable on commercial mixed use, nonprofit agriculture, etc. Cultivation centers should have the following essential conditions: access control, clean room practices, which is foot baths, lab suits, proper footwear, sanitation for hands, securely monitoring clean air intake and exhaust, use of carbon filters on all intakes and exhaust ports, non-wood construction, non-fabric construction. Grow tents are high vectors for contamination, and wastewater mitigation. Requirement for composting, wastewater mitigation requirement for composting practices for all spent grow media. Composting will keep over 75% of the water produced out of the landfill and allows for controlled disposal of waste that may have traces amount of psilocybin within it. In regional counties, landfill capacity is a huge distress. Cultivation centers should consider establishing a community composting program where food household compost can be brought and mixed into the center's compost. The resulting soil can be donated to community urban farms or can be sold as garden compost, and profits used to reduce production costs, which will keep costs of medicine lower. And then spent grow media does not have easily consumable sources of active or pro drugs. Complex extract techniques must be used to remove these metabolites, but to ensure public safety, a composting protocol will diffuse this. Labeling system for tracking of all product throughout its entire life cycle, allowing for tracking of final product as it awaits testing, and allows for product removal from inventory. Testing produces negative results. This allows for traceability of spore to end consumable product. Creates incentives for eco-friendly techniques, solar, wind power, water reclamation, composting, LED lighting, etc. And then allow for cultivation centers to perform extracts and other product creations. Keeping a monthly log of cleaning or fruiting chambers. The water used within the grow cycle should be purified, distilled, water as mushrooms absorb heavy metals and other chemicals, allow for future cultivation of other approved plant medicines. Grow techniques are similar for other plant medicines, so to keep future cultivation costs at bay, this approach makes sense. Have protocols for the handling of product and equipment, and if there is a closure of an improved producing grow facility, packaging and storage of product, methods and shelf life, transportation of products to testing facilities and therapists. So that's what Sue has put out. I'm going to format it and then I can send it out as well in the board packet for folks for the following meeting. But I think Sue, you did great outlining of a lot of the questions around this and some things to consider for this subcommittee. Do you want to expand on any of these specifically?
No, I just wanted to, throw it out as a starting point for some of these. I know these are some of the basic requirements we have to abide by under our DEA license. So when you're federally regulated by DEA, manufacturing psilocybin mushrooms for clinical trials, these are all the elements that they demand from us. So I thought the state might want to emulate many of these tenets here.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Connor, you've had your hand up. Apologize.
No, it's okay. I'm glad that you read those, and I want to thank Dr. Sisley for providing all this. It was a great head start on what we need to do. So thanks. And then the question it really brings to my mind is the who's going to police that? So that I think the cannabis industry the state has the marijuana enforcement division. Are we going to do we need to recommend creating an enforcement division or an oversight auditing division that would audit grow practices as an additional question to add?
Yeah.
Sue, I just want to say thank you for so much prep work. That's amazing. We are so lucky to have you here, and all of your experience is really sensational.
Thank you, man.
Agree. Thank you, Dr. Sisley.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think it's a good list to add in there. Anyone want to expand on this? Or any other pieces that we haven't really touched on, whether it's potential health risks and how they should be disclosed to potential participant. And I think that pertains to the species of psilocybin or any of that, or what tools that facilitators will use to identify psilocybin would be beneficial to a potential participant. Are there circumstances in which psilocybin should be denied to a participant? Anything else around potentially maybe testing standards or questions around that? Or sorry, I saw Skippy's hand up.
Well, I don't know. Around testing, just kind of hearing you go through some of those things, I thought I bulleted out a list of things that we could consider, data types that we consider gathering. And these are very large buckets, so we'll get with much more specificity. So forgive me for being 3,000 feet, but I think things we could look at are, mental health condition and outcomes, physical health condition and outcomes, risk profiles, connection and well-being, both individual, family, societal level outcomes, and then characteristics or protocols for screening, setting, and integration protocols, medicine type, cultivation method, and handling method, duration, frequency, and dosage of use, and then indigenous and or religious components or characteristics to practice or protocol. Very large buckets, a lot in there, but I think that captures possibly the scope.
Dr. Sisley.
Yeah, I on the testing, I just want to just kind of emphasize that we still don't have validated methods for potency testing in natural mushrooms. So we have labs that are, kind of getting their feet wet, experimenting with, they're purchasing psilocybin, psilocin standards and trying to figure it out. But I think one of the most important things we can do as a state is to insist that people are using, hopefully over the next few months there will be publications coming out. People are looking at this now. How do we test the potency of either natural mushrooms or extract? It's so easy to measure when it's synthetic molecule, but now we're dealing with natural materials. So I think the minimum the program needs to require is that all the labs are using validated methods for potency testing of whatever formulation they're using, whether it's a whole fruiting body or a chocolate or gummy. And then also that whatever their outcomes, that we as a state are requiring proficiency testing among any license. So if a lab is granted a license, they should be required to submit to proficiency, like a round robin testing. Everybody gets the same sample of each of the different formulations, and they all have to, get within a certain potency range in order to be eligible to continue their license.
That's great. Dr. Connor.
Just another point of order, especially as we move forward through these meetings. There's a question in the chat that comes from the audience. Do we address those? How do we address those? What's the best practice for that?
So we won't be doing public comment at this meeting, but we will at a later date. Right now, we're focusing on the scope of work questions specifically, and we can follow up with public comment questions after, or Matt specifically.
I have one more thing to add. I can't tell if my hand is up again or not, but
no, I can hear you there.
Okay. And now I think it just went up. Cool. So the statute, one more thing I think you guys need to cover, at least some subcommittee needs to cover, is the addition of natural medicines to the regulated program. So someone needs to make that recommendation. Right now it's psilocybin and psilocin, but someone from the board needs to make a recommendation on DMT, ibogaine, mescaline not derived from peyote. And I think that's all of them. Yeah.
Hand up, Dr. Connor.
So if I'm understanding what Brian's indicating, do you think this subcommittee should be asking questions and or making recommendations about whether we should be adding substances to the act?
Makes sense to me for it to be this one. Just some subcommittee needs to cover it and needs to make recommendations. So, I mean, this is the products committee, so it seems like a natural fit.
Yeah, I agree with Brian.
Okay. So then I had a question to the list of questions. What are the procedures and policies that this subcommittee would use to make recommendations about future substances? And then I think just looking at the questions we have already, I think that, some of the questions that are unless they're specific to psilocybin, but would apply to the same, if we were making recommendations about medications, we would, or other substances, we would need to be familiar with the research on those substances and then understand how they may be treated differently based on side effect profiles, abuse profiles, and or dangerousness, so on and so forth, as a starting point. And maybe the starting point is either whether we have enough science yet to make recommendations about adding substances to the list.
Right. Love that in there.
And I think one thing to think about is what's the difference between product cultivation when you're talking about growing a product versus synthesizing a product, because some of the substances on the list might require additional synthesis beyond just cultivation. And I have another question that's I think not related specifically to this, but in general, is there a subcommittee, or is this a subcommittee that should be talking about state taxes and whether they're going to be tax implications for selling, distribution, whether those would be collected and allocated in some way? Does that fall to the board in general and or this subcommittee? And if this is distribution, cultivation distribution, then I would assume it would fall here, but I don't want to add even more work to our plate if it's not necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can discuss that further, but I think it would make sense once the subcommittee has, submitted some rules or recommendations and where we are in the process. But yeah, I think that is something we're going to have to look at and see if it does fall within this wheelhouse, if it's around the cultivation, the testing, as well as the distribution. Yeah, no, that's a good question.
And maybe I can ask Brian directly. Brian, is there any language in the bill about taxes and tax and product distribution?
I mean, I guess so. I would say that there's like an explicit charge from the General Assembly for you to look at it. If you wanted to talk about it, I could probably fit it into one of these. Like, for example, there was something in here about like appropriate regulatory action or some words to that effect. Basically, yeah, appropriate regulatory considerations for each natural medicine. I could argue that was a question about taxes, but no, there's nothing in here that I've seen that says you shall consider tax implications of the various natural medicines.
Okay. Are there any additional questions that anyone might have that we want to add onto this at the moment?
Are there going to be certifications for cultivators like we're going to have for facilitators?
Yeah. So what are the qualifications for cultivation and testing?
Yeah, and is that going to be a separate license? How is that going to work?
Yeah, I think there could be a question around integration, right? If you're thinking about healing centers that could potentially cultivate and distribute, then what's the license look like for that process compared to individuals who just want to be facilitators but don't want to cultivate?
Skippy?
I guess just a follow-up question to that is cultivation and practitioner, but in between, like product creation or processing of any kind, do those all have to be the same person? Can it be different? Can the cultivator also process? Can they only cultivate and process, right? I mean, what are the distinctions there, and how do those pieces interact if they're handled by different parties?
What are the licensing distinctions between cultivation, testing, and licensing? Or facilitating?
Is that a clarifying question to Mike?
Yeah. I was just trying to.
Yeah, yes, but processing as well, right? So someone may cultivate the mushroom, and someone else may take that and put it into a pill form and grind it up and portion it, or someone might take it and put it into a chocolate bar, whatever, right? So,
yeah, that's good. That's a good question.
I have one follow-up. This is pretty specific, but I know, there's regulations about edibles and labeling and things like that. And are we going to have similar things for things like chocolate bars, things like that?
Skippy, your hands up.
Just realized that. My bad. Back down.
No, you're good. Brian.
One more that I think the board's required to cover is land use concerns and sustainability with respect to cultivation.
All right. Dr. Connor.
I was just going to say that I think we've now got a very long and hopefully comprehensive list, and maybe we should put a pin in adding questions.
Yeah, I think this is a good place. And then I can compile this together for the follow-up meeting to, I guess, identify and distinguish which takes priority in the rulemaking process. With that, we can go to agenda item 3 if we have no other comments or questions that we want to add in here. So everyone's good with that? Okay. So agenda item number 3 is the adoption of the future schedule. The next meetings for the Products Research and Data Subcommittee, as I have them based off of everyone's schedule from the poll and the 2 weeks cadence of the meetings. I have May 10th, May 24th, and June 7th, all beginning at 1 p.m. As the next 3 following meetings for the subcommittee. Do I have a motion to adopt schedule?
If I'm following Robert's rules, I'll make the motion.
All right.
And ask for a second.
I'll second the motion, Skippy. But can you clarify, Sam? You said 1 p.m. starting May 10th and then repeating bi-weekly. Is that right?
Correct. So it would be May 10th at 1, May 24th at 1, and June 7th at 1.
And so May 10th at 1, I'll be on an airplane.
Okay.
I'm just playing time travel game.
Actually, let me confirm that. I might be in a car. I've been on a lot of these in cars already, but let me confirm when my flight is at least.
Yeah, that looks okay for me.
I might have some issues with May 10 as well.
Yeah, so my flight takes off at 2 p.m. on May 10th. So
okay.
It'd be
Would 9 o'clock to 1?
I could probably make it work. Someone else had something about a problem with May 10th. Would 9 a.m. work for you?
We just have to have enough to hold a quorum.
Yeah, I mean, as subcommittee chair, I'd like to be able to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can make 9 a.m. work.
I'm at an all-day training retreat on the East Coast, so I'll just have to jump out as best I can. I don't think I can commit to anything that day, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Okay. So May 10th from 9 to 1, May 24th from 1, starting at 1, and then June 7th, starting at 1. that works. So do I have a motion for that?
I think okay, so I'll make a motion that we adopt the schedule that Sam's just described and ask for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the schedule for the products research and data subcommittee is now May 10th from 9 to 1, May 24th from starting at 1, and then June 7th at 1. Billy?
Thanks. Yeah, just maybe this is a matter for the next meeting, but just in general, I wanted to ask if if we'll go over protocol for maybe dedicating some of these sessions to almost like, collecting public testimony, like inviting, like a committee hearing, like inviting people to talk about these things, like experts.
Yeah,
and
like
also
to open for public comment and then potentially bring experts in for the following meeting.
Well, yeah, it's kind of two different, actually, it was kind of two different points I wanted to make. One was that either a specific session or maybe a portion of each session where we allow for public comment. I think that's important somewhere along the way. And certainly at some point, written submitted comment is something I want us to consider as well. Maybe that comes to the regulation making phase with that Dora will manage. That's probably fine with me, but I think we should at least discuss it. And then the idea of having some sessions that are dedicated to like live expert testimony and Q&A with the subcommittee. Again, I don't have hard fast feelings for whether or not we do that, but I think we should at least discuss the possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to endorse that strongly. I totally agree. I have a handful of people in my network who know infinitely more about sort of study design, et cetera, that I'd love to hear from. And they're people that, are not going to come on for 4 months, but would love to, come in for 30 minutes here or whatever. So I think that's great. And giving flexibility of ways to submit, I think is quite smart.
Absolutely. Okay. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation during today's meeting. Before we adjourn, I'd like to discuss the next meeting will be held on May 7th at 9 a.m. Please remember that your attendance is necessary.
Sam, the next meeting
Sorry.
is May 10th.
May 10th. I apologize. Wait, let's see. May 10th. I apologize.
May 10th at 9 a.m.
The typo. May 10th at 9 a.m. Please remember that your attendance is necessary to ensure a quorum for the meeting. Do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and that confidentiality of all board matters has been maintained since the previous board meeting? Let's see. Dr. Connor.
I attest.
Dr. Hanum.
I attest.
Mr. Mesro.
I attest.
Mr. Nguyen.
I attest.
Dr. Sicily.
I attest.
Okay, awesome. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, this meeting of the Natural Medicine Advisory Board Subcommittee on Products Research and Data is ended. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you guys so much. I'm really excited to engage in this with you. Yeah. Bye for now.